Hello and welcome to another episode of Fellowship in Essential Oils. Today, Liz, we're going to dive into an oil that some people love, some people hate, but hopefully we can build a bit of an appreciation for it. We're going to explore spikenard.
It's an oil I definitely love. It doesn't smell great, I got to say. It's my husband always says whatever I make for him smells disgusting, but with this one I have to I have to concede it doesn't smell great, but it is. I think it's a lifesaver if somebody's in shock or has had a traumatic event or has really bad tummy. Really good for bad bellies. And for those who don't know, I've written a book about spikenard. If you have a look on Amazon, you'll be able to find it. And it has a picture of a phoenix on the front. Because it was said that the phoenix lived in a nest made of spikenard.
Oh, really? Because normally it is native to areas like I know, like high up in the mountains of Nepal and so on. So is that kind of, do you know much behind the mythology of the phoenix live that area?
Yeah, so the phoenix. Actually, there's a lot about the research I did on the phoenix in the book. It was kind of a Greco-Egyptian mythology, and it's very much connected with the rebirth of the sun. And they do think that while the phoenix obviously is a mythical creature, it's known as the Bennu bird in Egyptian mythology. They do think there was like a giant kind of flamingo at the time that looked like it was might have looked like it was flying on the top of a heat haze. So they think maybe that's what people saw. But the idea of the phoenix was that it was a creature that never died. So the phoenix would I can't remember it exactly, but the phoenix would fly to Heliopolis, which was a famous temple in Greece, and it would land on the altar, and it would, I think it used to take its father is the thing, and then it would make itself a nest made of nard and of frankincense. Then it would pack itself into an egg made of myrrh and set itself on fire, and then it would die. And from the third day, a little wormy new bird would grow. And so you had this perpetual thing. And this happened every 500 years. So Herodotus talks about it, and he says nobody's ever seen it happen because it happens every 500 years. So there's nobody that's alive that does it. But this idea of something that dies and rises again in three days is very interesting, that it's connected with spikenard, because of course that's the nard that they say that Christ's feet was anointed with.
Yes.
So this interesting link over mythology happening.
Very much so. And I guess, we're recording this in December, the last month of the year, when everyone's kind of winding down for one year and getting ready for the next. And there is that kind of that energy of reinvention and rebirthing that kind of comes of like, okay, what's worked and what hasn't worked and how do I want to change it? So spikenard, not, normally attributed as much as myrrh and frankincense to Christmas celebrations and so on, but it really could be quite, quite relevant at this time of year, couldn't it?
I yes, because it's definitely a winter oil. But I would say if you were to give it a day, then it would be a Good Friday oil. It's the word, or maybe like the Saturday, that time of the darkness when things feel like they are completely desolate. That's the vibration of spikenard.
Just to be clear, I guess we should kind of make sure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to spikenard being referred to in the Bible. So just before Jesus was crucified, Mary Magdalene had an alabaster jar, and it was filled with what they refer to as nard, which we believe is spikenard, and she anointed Jesus's feet as a bit of a sign of respect and gratitude before he was crucified. So that's where it kind of is featured as being a really important essential oil or substance in the Bible, and thus in spirituality as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. We don't know it was Mary Magdalene. We assume it was Mary Magdalene. We heard it was Mary. So it could have, it's unlikely to have been his mother, but it could as easily have been a lady called Mary of Bethany, who turns up in lots of different narratives in the Bible, and she was also one of the Myrophores who embalmed his body at the end of his life. So she was definitely like a mistress of the myrrhs. That's what of the oils. That's what a Myrophore is. So it could have been her, but we think it probably was Mary Magdalene. And likewise, we hear that the ointment was nard. But interestingly, and again, a lot of investigation of this in the book. I really enjoyed doing it. Trying to find archaeological evidence. Obviously, we don't know what nard was, so we suspect it was spikenard. And I talk about lots of sort of men from the 1800s, 1900s have done lots of research into this to try to work out what it was, and there was lots of different narratives that it could have been. So it could have been lavender. Lavender is also called nard sometimes, and also ginger grass. Which was really interesting to me. But by the end of it, I did set out to disprove the idea that it was spikenard, but I do agree it was by the end of it, yeah.
Yeah. Was there other references apart from just that one biblical reference where spikenard was being used in that area?
Well, so if you look at the Bible itself as an entity, not that I recall. However, my favourite story comes from Apocrypha. So if anybody doesn't know what Apocrypha is books that were written around about the same time as the New Testament was written. Sometimes Jewish, sometimes Christian, Gnostic. But when they decided what was going to go into the Bible, they said, no, that's not. But so it's written around about the same time. And it's a book called the Proto-Evangelium of James, a very important apocryphal gospel, Christian, that talks about a lot about the childhood of Christ. And actually, it's from there that we get the idea that of the Immaculate Conception. So a lot of people think that the Immaculate Conception means that Jesus was immaculately conceived. Not so. The Immaculate Conception was that Mary was also born of a virgin birth, so that she was immaculate too. So it's a very interesting book, a beautiful book, talks about how she gave birth. She said that in this book she gives birth in a cave, and that a midwife was there to check that she was intact before and after the birth. So it was beautiful stuff. And in there, it talks about how spikenard was also used when Jesus was, or Yeshua, perhaps we should say, was circumcised, and that the foreskin was placed into spikenard and preserved in that, or in nard, I should say nard. Now, the reason why this is one of my favorite stories is because I have like a personal connection to this. So my in-laws live in France in a place local to Charroux, and there's this beautiful old not a temple, not even a church, like a monastery really, with a big tower. And my mother-in-law used to say, people used to pilgrimage here from all over, and they used to go, why? And she'd go, I don't know. I don't know why. Anyway, so in the research for this spikenard, I discovered that this was people came here to visit the royal foreskin, the divine foreskin. And so in around about the 1500s, because relics became this huge like tourist attraction, the problem was that the Vatican had that everybody was going, I've got the royal foreskin. No, I've got the royal foreskin. No, I've got the royal foreskin. So we called the Priapus. And there's about 10 different places around Europe that said, we have it. We're a bit like Spartacus. We have it. No, we have it. And in the end, the Pope at the time, can't remember his name, ruled that the one at Charroux was the real one. Don't know how they managed to work that out. But so this is why they were all pilgrimaging to this place. They were coming to see the relic of the Holy Foreskin.
I've suddenly my brain's gone off on DNA testing would be a really
Right,
interesting.
but
Yeah.
so you go from DNA testing to Monty Python. It always amuses me. I think it's ever so funny, but also delightful.
Yeah, very much so. Now, a bit of a trivia question for you. Do you know why, like in the Bible, it's referred to as nard? How did we get to spikenard? Do you know?
I don't know, but I can say that's one of the reasons why they think that lavender might be nard because of spike lavender. Is it something to do with the star speaker?
I'm not sure. What
I
were you
think there's a
referring to there?
relationship, and I can't remember exactly, but I think there's a relationship with the star speaker. Yeah, but go on.
Yeah. So, you've spoken a little bit about, it's great for a few physical things. I know a lot of people that have got hold of some spikenard. Maybe they've read about it. It sounds, it's got that biblical reference. It sounds like a fascinating oil. They've got it home. It's arrived. They've smelt it. They've now ordained it to be called stinknard because they don't like the aroma of it. On a physical level, where would you reach? Like you mentioned a couple of things quickly when we started. Where does spikenard work in the physical realm of healing?
So, if you look at it from a point of view of Ayurveda, it works on a particular pathway of energy called Rakta Dhatu. So the Dhatus are sort of, they become hot and cold, if you like. And Rakta Dhatu is about extreme heat moving through the body. So you might think of, so it's like an extension of Pitta dosha. So you might think of really hot, painful periods, really angry explosions of temper or of diarrhea. You might also think of projectile vomiting, this idea that there's like a volcano about to explode in the body. The other thing that I always think of is real burning cystitis, where everything is just like, it feels really bad. Your skin goes really reactive, like in eczema, but also rosacea. So that, like, as if there's a fire, as if the phoenix is coming back and exploding in the body, and spikenard brings it right down. Go on.
I was going to say, so it grounds explosiveness.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and the idea as well that and personally, I use it for terror. When you've gone around the corner and you weren't expecting what you were going to see, and it was like, I can't unsee it. So things like PTSD, real horrific anxiety. In the masterclass, somebody was asking me what I thought was the best oil for anxiety. And whilst it's not like a low level, like rumbling anxiety all of the time, that is one of the worst things that's ever happened to me. And I just don't, paralyzed. I always say, like, in the cartoon, frightened cat, when the cat's hair is standing on end, that's spiked. It's spiked. That's spikenard. Yeah.
And with so many people not being a fan of the aroma, I actually do quite like it. Like many essential oils, sometimes you have an aversion to start off with and you learn to love it and appreciate it, probably because of its value as well. How would you recommend people using this more topically, or for things like terror, are they just putting it in a blend? How would you go about
topically
using something?
and in the bath? Yeah. And actually, so another thing that's in the book, it's all coming back to me as I speak. In India, it's a root. If people don't know, it's a root of a tiny flower, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It's used for cholera, and in dates around about 1860, 1863, I think, cholera went right the way through Europe, and hundreds of people died. And I can remember reading about a street that was not far from where I grew up, where every person except for one died, and the cholera just wiped out a whole street. And it was real awful situation. And one man who had been like one of these East India botany collectors had was really campaigning hard through the newspapers, through the medical newspapers in England, saying, please listen to me, what I'm saying. India are on top of this because they're using spikenard. And so this awful dysentery that was, you know, the sickness and diarrhea, of course, now we know washing hands is the deal, but they didn't know that then. And people were just dying in them, literally millions in England. And he was going, please, please listen. They've really got a handle on it. They're using spikenard over here and it's just stopping it. But they never listened. And it was really to Britain's peril that they didn't, because India really got on top of it using spikenard.
Yeah, wow. And I was interested when you said at the start that, you know, it's an oil that you'd use for the digestive system. To be honest with you, I've never really heard of it being referred to for that. Would you use it in those kind of cases where, you know, diarrhea, there's like food poisoning, that type of thing, to kind of bring down that explosiveness again?
Yes. Chronic diarrhea, awful cramping, because it's tremendous for pain. And the other thing is sleep. If somebody really can't sleep, it's a good one. But again, it's a sleep from terror, you know, just things going through the mind, they can't settle. It's a really amazing sleep thing. But yeah, anything that's hot and explosive, that's its application. But so in 2015, I was invited to go and speak in China for the International Federation of Aromatherapists. And when you speak for the IFA, you, honest to goodness, you are treated like royalty. And they take you to all of these different places. And we went to the most beautiful restaurant where they served apparently the world's best Peking duck. And there was nothing that I tasted that could argue with that. It was incredible. And we had some special guests there from an orphanage that the IFA sponsor. They raise money for this orphanage. So I don't know if people know that the living wage in Nepal, where spikenard grows, it grows in the foothills of the Himalayas and quite high up, sort of around about 800,000 feet, I think, if I remember rightly. The average wage is really, really low, and so because this is like this area of incredible flora, most people in Nepal supplement their income. Around about another quarter of the year's wages comes from going off and harvesting medicinal plants for export, because for most of them they don't even know what they're for. It's not really taught over there. And these children were in this orphanage not because they didn't have parents, but because their parents were going off to do this work. So they would go for around about 3 months, 4 months at a time, and these children would live in this monastery, which was so high up in the mountains, way above, it's so close to the sun, and all of their skin was really, really burnt. There was no protection for their skin whatsoever. Now, don't get me wrong, these were happy kids. There was nothing wrong with the way that they were brought up, but I really want to stress to people, the cost of getting this oil, the personal cost, is colossal. You know, those children go without parents for months at a time. Those parents don't see their children growing up, you know, and those children are in a place where potentially they're going to have skin cancer because of us using those essential oils. So whilst it is an incredibly important essential oil, and we should definitely all have a bottle, it's a bottle for those awful moments, not like just use it for the sake of using it. Please, I beg you, don't just use it for the sake of using it.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to go to Nepal and do some work there after the big earthquakes that happened several years ago now. I'm not going up as high as where spikenard comes from, but where a lot of wintergreen, Nepalese wintergreen is sourced from, and seeing, must admit, you know, poverty like I haven't seen before.
Exactly.
But happiness like I've never seen before as well. Yeah. And someone gave a really interesting kind of talk to us at the time about, you know, what is poverty? And, you know, we were talking about not having, you know, food and medicine and that type of thing. And then they flipped it and said, well, what do you not have? And we're like, well, we don't have time to spend with our loved ones, and we've got too much, you know, we don't have that type of luxury. And she's like, well, look what they have here. So who's the poor people really, type of thing. And it's really quite insightful to have that kind of flipped around about that we're all poor in one way or another, not to discredit, the challenges that people in Nepal have. I also had the pleasure of meeting someone who got to source, went and kind of started the initial conversations with people that were going out and collecting the spikenard. He said from Kathmandu, he drove for 6 days and then the road stopped to had to trek for 23 days. And he's like, I'm here on an assignment. I'm here to get something by the name of spikenard. Do you have any? And they, eagerly brought out this root and he smelt it. And he's like, I've just gone on a week's ordeal to get something that smells like feet.
Thin. Yeah, they gave me a bag of it, and I was like, "What on earth is that?" It took me ages to work out what it was. Grubby looking thing, but actually, so it's also got another name. So people will often call it the Jatamansi. That's the Latin name, but it's called the Jatamansi, and it kind of can grow in the UK. So every year. I buy one and kill it, but it's not. I just don't do very well with it at all. But just to tell people, it's like it has a big root, which is obviously what they're farming, and then this incredibly long, very very thin stalk, and the tiniest little pinky white flowers. Think of a forget-me-not, and think of it like a quarter of a size. So pretty, but it just gets lost in amongst everything else. Everything else goes over the top. And I'm like, where's it gone? And I don't even know why I grow it, really, because how can I ever use it? It's never going to be able to use that. But there's something about the plant that I just love so much. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And I do believe that most of the sourcing of spikenard is through what's called wild harvesting. So what that is, instead of, being grown and farmed and that kind of thing, it is kind of collected in the wild. But those that are collecting it need to be careful, because it's not just about rip it all out everywhere, because there'll be none left. That you need to put some of the plant back so that it does continue to grow for the next season. And it's a bit protected as well. So sometimes there can be some supply issues because, we've got to make sure.
Right. There is a protective stipulation now as well that it can only be made into an essential oil in Nepal now. So previously it was going to India, and of course India were just making huge amounts of money from it. But now it's protected that it has to stay in that country so that they can use that as an economical boost to their country.
They need, for sure. I want to share a little bit of a story. I had never actually heard of spikenard before it kind of came into my hands one day, and I had a little bottle of it. And one of the things I love to do before I start diving into a new essential oil and going, okay, well, what does everyone else think about it? I'm like, well, what's my first impression? Just like it's nice when we meet someone if we don't have any preconceived ideas. So I open up the bottle. I smelt it and I was like, oh, it's an interesting smell. I wasn't repulsed by it. But then the word that echoed in my mind was namaste. Now, I knew nothing about this plant, and, namaste has many different translations, but the one that really resonates for me is the light within me honors the light within you. And where I've found is it was interesting that, did Jesus need to have his feet anointed? No, but someone wanted to give him that gift so that, as a sign of honoring us. And I think spikenard, for me, has become this really amazing oil for people to work with when it comes to realizing our own self-worth. And I remember very much once when doing a reading, and one of the oils that came up for this person was spikenard. And often when I go to that, I kind of go down the narrative of, well, okay, what's your value in this world? You're underplaying who you are and that type of thing. And she was like, oh, no. I know. She was a clairvoyant. She's like, I'm very good at what I do. And, I don't know what you're talking about. And the little voice in my head, or one of the many, said, or prompted me to ask her, does your family know that you're a clairvoyant? And she's like, oh, no. I could never tell my children. They'd think I'd wacko, and they'd never let me look after my grandchildren, that type of thing as well. So I find on an emotional healing level, it's a really, really powerful one for realizing our gifts and being okay with allowing ourselves to each be honest in our own light. And most of us, when someone pays us a compliment, I'd encourage them to reflect, how do we respond to that? A lot of the time we're like, they're like, oh, you look great today. You're like, oh, no, I just threw this on. Oh, my hair's, I'm getting fat, blah, blah, blah. And we don't actually realize our value. But if we're not shining brightly and, It's getting that balance between being boastful and, having self-worth. But if we're not valuing ourselves, then we're not valuing our contribution to the world. And I think Spikenard can help really powerfully with that. And I have found it to do that for several people.
I would say there's other oils that could do the job. We don't need to use it for that.
Okay. Yeah. But bergamot is self-worth.
Because
yeah.
like this thing of like, don't use it unless you have to is deep, like a core thing with me. And so to me, I agree that would be true. But to me, I would say, but there's other oils that could do that.
What would you go for in that case then? Someone who's not valuing their gifts and don't feel that they're a valuable contributor to the world.
I think I'll probably go something like lime.
Okay.
Or what else? Maybe patchouli. Ones that kind of make you feel more in your body, of like you inhabit that whole space, if that makes sense, rather than fractionalize yourself off.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, that unless that was causing like a some kind of psychological split in the person's psyche, I'd be going, nope.
Yeah. Yeah, it might probably where I'd prompt people to reach for it is those periods in time when we seem to hit a bit of a low point, or we're kind of getting stuck in the world and we're not realizing maybe things are going wrong around us, and we need to, like a phoenix, evolve. But in order for the phoenix to kind of be reborn, we've got to believe in ourselves. And I think people often get this, whether it be certain times in their life. I was talking to someone yesterday who's about to turn 42, which is when Uranus is what's called in opposition to when we were born. Different things like that, like your midlife crisis, things like that. It might be a little time just to kind of lean into Spikenard for a short period of time, just to go, things are changing. I can't stay where I am. I need to get out of this nest and build the next one. But if you don't believe in yourself, a lot of people will stay in relationships, in jobs, in scenarios, because they don't believe that they deserve any better. And that's maybe where I'd kind of go, that might be a good one for Spikenard there, for that kind of evolution.
Yeah, I think that from a planetary point of view, to me, it's definitely a Saturn oil. From the point of view of like how dull and like monotonous and dark the world feels when you've got that Saturn transit. Also, like the idea of how Saturn rules the bones and that kind of the structure of the body. Spikenard's very good for those kind of situations where the body is cold and creaky. But it's interesting the way I'd absolutely agree with like the 42 Uranus transit. So I always say that's like a strange time, almost like the problem that somebody has with that midlife crisis is they're stuck between Saturn's going, do the work, all that responsibility, pay the bills, and then Neptune's going, come on, come and play, and then you get that. So you still have that Saturn thing of like the monotony, the responsibility, the authority, the duty. I mean, bear in mind, we're talking about, let's take it back to the idea that she anointed his feet. He knew something awful was coming, and the idea that you've got to follow that duty through. And in the earlier books that I wrote, I did a lot with music, and if I remember rightly, in this book, one of the pieces of music I picked was Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, and from Prince of Egypt, and it was the song that was sung by the people, the Israelites coming out of Egypt, and this idea that just got to trust that this is going to work, just got to trust, have this faith. And I do think that is very much a Spikenard thing, that there is no reason for me to trust. Everything's gone, but I am going to keep on trying to trust.
Yeah. So maybe spikenard might be a good oil for when we need to take a leap of faith.
Yes.
So things like deciding to call off a relationship, deciding to leave a job, deciding to, with with my Uranus opposition, I decided to up and leave a relationship and move to the Middle East for a year type of thing. It's normally those things. And you've just got to believe in yourself and need that support. Kind of something has to die in order for something new to grow. And maybe spikenard can give you some strength it's hard to make those types of decisions in our life.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about people who are in a domestic abuse relationship, and to an outsider, they're like, well, if it was that bad, they'd have left,
Yeah.
But people don't understand the sheer power of the fear of what will happen if I leave. And the fear becomes so overwhelming that you take everything. Then that would be a spikenard thing, because it's like we've got to address that terror.
Yeah. So I guess maybe as we've kind of mined down a little bit to clarify, it's not just a self-worth one, like you're feeling a bit low today, so give yourself a pick-me-up. You said lime, I'd go bergamot, those kind of things. They're the kind of everyday ones, but when it's time for that, like, that grounded self-belief and that real kind of like, you got this kind of thing, you gotta take that leap.
I mean, really, if you were to give like that moment a name, it's initiation. That you are going through this massive spiritual crisis and into a new way of being, and terrifying. You're definitely in the dark night of the soul.
Yeah. Yep. No, I'd agree. So obviously, you wrote a whole book on spikenard. For me, it isn't one that I reach for often, kind of thing. Any other fascinating facts that you think people need to know about spikenard from the body all the way through?
Read the book. What I have to say is that it's 400 pages long. It's the longest of all the books that I wrote, and there was so much to find about that oil. Definitely. Yeah.
Did you think it would be 400 pages when you started the project?
No, not at all. No.
And what made you choose spikenard?
Yeah, so actually, I'm not going to reveal because of an extremely personal moment in my life, but something happened where I was encountered by the worst kind of terror. Awful. And I had to leave where I was and had to go back on the train 2 hours, and I was crying all the way. I was just so frightened, talking to psychiatrists, trying to keep me calm. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't go back there. I can't see this place again. And so I was just like, what's in the cupboard? Couldn't even go near my oils. So just like open the door to the bathroom cupboard, spikenard. Yeah, that might work. Stuck it in the bath. Went to sleep. And the next morning I was like, right, so how do we address this problem then? And I was like, what? How did you go through that? I just, even to this day, I'm like, how did you go from unbelievable fear to the very next day going, well, it's awful, but I can't just walk away from it. And it was incredible. And I was like, what do people know about this oil? Let's go and find out what people know about this oil. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm toying around in my head with the astrology as we're kind of diving a little bit deeper. I originally have attributed it to Venus for that kind of self-worth, but I'm thinking now, maybe how would it go as an Uranus planet, do you think, for that ability to help us with those transitions?
I think that the energy of, it's almost the opposite. It's like the counter to Uranus. Uranus is almost like Pluto's got an explosive energy, hasn't it? Whereas Saturn is cool and cold.
Discipline,
and he's really, really cool. And interestingly, the only really real reason that it been in my bathroom cupboard was I like to mix it with spearmint. So interestingly, Mentis spicata, spike again. And the two of them together are really cooling. So in the summer, for hot feet, it's fantastic. So that it is a really cooling oil. Remember, everything that you're using is from explosive energy. So I can see, you could say like Uranus, like rulership, but it actually, like, it's the antithesis of it, if that makes sense. It's the cold, and it's like, sit there, do nothing, be quiet, it just, you can't do anything. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. Chakra wise, where would you place it with the chakras then?
Root chakra, brow chakra, crown chakra.
Yeah, I tend to work with the Earth Star chakra, that deeper honoring, and it's a kind of a bit of a higher vibration kind of oil as well. Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting oil, and hopefully we've been able to help people appreciate it a little bit more and know when first of all, one, to value it. Secondly, when to value it and when to reach for it as well. And hey, if it's good enough for Jesus, he didn't use it every day, just on special occasions. So that's one note that we really want to leave it with. But of course, where can people grab your Spikenard book if they want to dive in a little bit more?
Yeah, you can get it directly from me, but easiest at this time of year to get it's on Amazon.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Now, if you are interested, we've kind of floated around these ideas of what's called Saturn returns, and Jupiter returns, Chiron returns, and Uranus returns. Have a bit of a Google if those kind of terms of interest to you. And maybe in the masterclass, I can talk a little bit about them, a bit more of these significant times in our lives that when you look back at certain ages, when planets return back to where they were when you were born, it seems to it's different from a retrograde where, like a retrograde, something happens to everyone. But the returns are personal. They happen at different times for each individual on this planet. And they kind of parallel with things like the good old famous midlife crisis as well. And there are oils that can obviously help us transition through each of them as well. But if we piqued your interest, check that out as well. Our next masterclass will be in early February. Look down below for the link and the details. But thank you very much for joining us today on Fellowship in Essential Oils. We'll see you soon when we dive into another gift from Mother Nature.
Bye-bye.